Today's daf is daf Yud Daled, and we'll start the new parak with the Mishnah on the bottom of daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis. So this is the list of exceptions to the rule of Isur Giluach b'Moed, and in these cases we allow a person to cut his hair b'Moed. And the Gemara is going to talk about the fact that in general we do not allow Giluach on Moed. Haba mivdina sayam, so he comes from a far trip, therefore he couldn't cut his hair. Umibeis hashivya, he was just released and redeemed from the Beis Hashevi from captivity. He didn't have the ability to cut his hair during his time in the Shevi, Vayotze Beis Asurim, or they let him out of jail, so he wasn't able to cut his hair in jail. Vamenuda, and a person who's in Nidui, who has all the dinim of the Isur of the Isurim of Chol Moed, including the Isur Giluach, but he tirulo Chachamim, the Chachamim relieved him of this excommunication on the Moed. So he didn't have a chance because he was enjoined from taking a haircut before the Moed, so we'll allow him to take a haircut on the Moed. Our person had a neder that he would not cut his hair, and the Chacham was matir his neder on Yontif, and therefore he's allowed to cut his hair on Yontif. He was unable to cut his hair before Yontif because of the neder. Now he has Charata, he has Pesach. They were matir the neder during the festival, and therefore you cannot blame him for his failure to take a haircut for Yontif. These are all cases of what we call onus, in other words, unavoidable situations. Ha-nazir va-mitzora mitum oso l'taros. So if we have a nazir who's not allowed to cut his hair, he has other isurim, he's not allowed to enter into Beis HaKaparos and be mitamim himself, he's not allowed to drink yayin or any product of grapes, kartzanim, vadzog, and the minimum amount of days of nazir is tam nazir shloshim yom. So here's a nazir who contracted tumah, and now the time for his tara is during Chol Moed. And according to the law of tara, he has to cut his hair on the 7th day of Yemei HaTara. And we're going to allow him to cut his hair even on Chol Moed. Now we have the case of Mitzorah. And again, on the 7th day of his tara, he's required to cut his hair. And if the 7th day overlaps with Chol Moed, then we're going to allow him to cut his hair. Normally, we do not allow laundering clothing on a Chol Moed with these following exceptions. And now we start today's daf, and that's Yud Dal. They voided the nidui on Chol Moed, and we're going to allow him now to clean his clothes and launder them on Chol Moed because he was enjoined from doing so during his period of nidui. Now we have things that get dirty and soiled very frequently, like, for example, mitpachos hayodayim, mitpachos hasfarim, umitpachos hasfar. So we're dealing with different kinds of cloths that are used either constantly to wash your hands or dry your hands. And these kinds of nappies get dirty very often, constantly. And therefore, you can't expect him, even if he laundered them before Yontif, to maintain their cleanliness during Yontif. So we're going to allow him to launder these during Chol Moed. Now we have the case of sheets or cloths that are used by barbers, and they cover the shoulders of the customers who are getting a haircut. And once again, we have something that gets soiled constantly and requires repeated washing. So even though he washed it on Erev Yontif, he's going to need to wash it again on Yontif, and therefore we're going to allow it. Now, this case of mitpachos hasfarim is not necessarily a reference to the barbers. It could be, as the Muki Yosef understands it, and the Meiri as well, that we're talking about cloths or covers for books. And in those days, they had scrolls, they had cloth, and they would wrap them in mitpachos. So, for example, you take a look at the end of Masechet Megillah, the Gemara is going to talk about mitpachos hasfarim. And since they're constantly handled, they frequently get soiled. And sfag are bath towels. Hazovim v'hazovos v'anidos v'yoldos. All these cases are cases of tmeim, whether they became tomei in the case of a zava, because she saw 3 years on 3 days continuously. In the case of a woman who gave birth, that's called the oledes, a nida. During her yimei anidus, she saw a tipas dam that came out of the bakar. And then we also have the case of a zav who has a discharge. In all these cases, the clothes get soiled very, very frequently because of these discharges. And therefore, we allow them to wash their clothing on Chol HaMoed. Chol HaOlim mituma l'tara. So somebody who makes that transition from a state of Tumah to a state of Tara, and this is a case where he has garments that are Tameh, or for example, you need Tvila b'mikvah, and once you need Tvila b'mikvah, this applies to garments as well, and you have to clean the garment. Harelu mutarim ushar kol adam asurim. So the Gemara asks ushar kol adam my time asurim, and here the explanation is that although cutting one's hair is a malacha d'oraisa, but on Chol HaMoed, only that which is a tircha or that which can undermine the simchas yantif was prohibited. And therefore, when you launder your clothes or cut your hair, even though on Shabbos and Yantif that would be a malacha, but during Chol HaMoed it should be mutter because it's something that you need for Simchas Yantif. And this is called in the language of the Ritva Tikkun HaGuf. And it's just similar like to eating and drinking according to the Ritva. So therefore it would be mutter mi'ikar adin. And that's why the Gemara is asking, my timing di asurim. And the Gemara answers Kiddusnan, based on a mission in Tainis, Anshe Mishmar. The Anshe Mamad. Anshe Mishmar are the Kohanim that were divided up, Sheva Kahuna, into 24 groups. Each Mishmar would get 1 week during the first half of the year to do the Avodah of the Mikdash, and another week during the second half of the year, the other 6 months of the year. And they had to go into the Mikdash looking very, very groomed. And we expect them to do the grooming before they enter into that week of Avodah. And as a protective measure to guarantee that they will take care of this before the week of the Avodah, the Mishnah prohibits them from cutting their hair or laundering their clothes during that 7-day period of Avodah. Anshe Maimad, right? The Torah requires in the case of a korban that the bailam of the korban stand over the korban. In the case of a korban tzibur like midim or musafim, you can't expect the entire Klal Yisrael to stand in the Beis HaMikdash at the time of that korban. So they needed representatives, what we call them in Hebrew nitzikim. And these nitzikim were called the Anshe Mamad. And the Anshe Mamad were divided up again into 24 groups to parallel the 24 mishmaros of Kohanim. And they would go into the Mikdash, and they were expected to take care of cutting their hair and laundering their clothes before they entered into the Mikdash. And therefore, Asurim l'saper l'chabes, during that week of Avodah in the Mikdash, whether it's the Anshe Mishmar or in the case of Anshe Mamad, they enter into the Mikdash. During that week, they're not allowed to cut their hair and launder their clothes. And this is the way Chazal guaranteed that they would take care of that before they entered into the Mikdash. Ubechamishi, but now at the end of that week, we're up to almost Erev Shabbos. Now we're going to allow them, if necessary, to groom and to launder in order to honor the Shabbos. That's called Kavod HaShabbos. And basically, the difference between Onig Shabbos and Kibud is that Onig is on Shabbos, whereas Kibud is preparing for Shabbos, before Shabbos. My timer. Why is it that they are not allowed to cut their hair or launder their clothes during the 7 days of service in the Beis Hamikdash? This would guarantee that they wouldn't start the week, enter into the Mikdash in a situation of nivel. Nivel means when when the hair is growing and the clothes are not laundered properly. And now the Gemara wants to use this as a parallel, as an analogy to the case of Chol Moed and Moed in general. Hachanami, here too by parallel, even though we said that cutting your hair and laundering your clothes would be mutter on Chol Moed because it's necessary for him to enjoy the Simchas HaYontif, but we're going to ask him to take care of this before Yontif, so that he doesn't enter into Yontif in that state of nivel. And in order to guarantee this, we're going to prohibit him from cutting his hair or laundering his clothes on the Moed, unless again he was onus. Of the law of Erev Haregel, what happens to a person who is onus on Erev Yontif? He couldn't take a haircut or launder his clothes. He was so fanumant, as we say in Yiddish. He was so preoccupied because he lost some sort of an object, an item. Maybe it was worth a lot of money, and he's so busy trying to locate it. He's orangutan. He's preoccupied. He doesn't have the focus of his mind to go into the barber or to the laundromat and take care of what he has to do before Yontif. We say came in the onus, but should we allow him to launder his clothes or cut his hair on Chol Moed? He was an onus. O Dilma came into Lamucha Milsa. We need a kind of an onus that's public knowledge, because if it's not public knowledge, nobody knows why he's laundering his clothes and taking a haircut on Chol Moed. They don't know that it was because Erev Yontif he was so tired running around looking for his Aveda. He had lost something in the stock market, so he's looking how he could recoup his losses. So since no one's aware of the fact that he was in an honest situation, people would think that one of two things: either that you're allowed to take a shave and a haircut on Yontif, or meaning Chol Moed, or people think that this guy is a violator of the law, and the Torah says V'isa Nikiyah. Abaye says, Yomu kol asrikin asuru. Srike baitus mutarim. Now we're talking about Erev Pesach. And we're talking about baking matzah on Erev Pesach. Now there's something called srikim. Srikim are breads that are made with some very specific indentations. And we're afraid that if we allow you to bake these breads and you want to make them chametz, then you might end up, and you want to make them matzah, I meant to say, you might end up making them chametzdik. He writes here that these have decorative figures etched into the dough itself. And now, while they're busy etching these figures into the dough, it might leaven, it might rise and ferment and become chametz. Then Baitos, who was in charge of the baking of matzahs, he came up with an idea that we could make like a cookie cutter kind of thing. We could actually chisel out these figures into some sort of a metal a cutter, a mold, and then we can just simply put it on the dough in such a way that it wouldn't take any extra time. Be just a split second. And the Chazal said that Yomu kol asrikin asur. People will not differentiate between those bakers like Baitus that had this mold. They will think it's a carte blanche heter to create matzahs that have decorative figures. Because they're not going to say Srike Baitus Mutarim. They don't understand why you are allowing the bakers at Baitus, you were allowing it. They think that it was a general all-inclusive heter. And by analogy, Abai is saying that once you allow someone who is honest, but nobody knows he was honest on Erev Yom Tov, and you're going to allow him on Chol Hamoed to take a haircut or launder his clothes, people are not going to differentiate between him and somebody else. They're going to come to mistakenly a carte blanche heter that you're allowed to shave and you're allowed to launder your clothes on Chol Hamoed. So we can't allow this to go on. Just like the Gemara says, we weren't going to allow the matzahs of Baitus to be baked for Pesach. So the Gemara asks, U'letaimech, according to you, that anything that if it's done in a public way, we have to be worried that people will draw the wrong conclusions. Is Hadi Amar Rav Asi Amar Rav Yochanan called Misha Eino El Cholok Echad Mutal Lechabso B'Chol Hamoed? How are you going to deal with Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan is addressing a case of a person who has only one set of garments, and he's allowing him to launder that garment on Chol Hamoed. Who's going to know that this is mamish bitzina? This is a private. You should be concerned about the spectators who have no clue as to why they allowed this person to launder his clothes. They don't know it's a person who's ein lo ela cholok echad. So how could Rabbi Yochanan have made this exception in the case of ein lo ela cholok echad? And the Gemara says, Hasanami, there too, Yomru kol asrike nasurim, srike Baitus mutarim. Once again, just like the logic of the Gemara in Pesachim with regard to Srike Baitus, we should apply the same logic here in the case of Mishain Lo Chaluk. We shouldn't allow him to launder his clothes on Chol Hamoed. And the Gemara answers, Mar Allah, Mar Barav Ashi, a Zoro Mochia Chalom. We do have a way of publicizing the fact that he has only one chalok, and that is from his azar. How does the azar, the belt, indicate that he has only one set of garments? He says the following: if a person has one set of garments, then he would put on an outer garment to cover himself while he was laundering his one garment. And what would he do if he put on this outer garment? He would wear a belt to prevent it from opening. Why? Because he's basically naked inside. The clothes that he wears on the inside are now in the laundry, and he has no other set of clothes. So he's going to really have to put on a belt to cover his, I call it almost like a bathrobe. And the onlooker, the spectator, sees the bathrobe, and he sees the belt, and he understands that he's naked underneath the garment. And that's going to be proof positive in the minds of the spectators that this man has only one garment. So again, the way that the person behaves when he does launder that one garment that he has is going to indicate during the laundering process that he has only one challah. So therefore, you have no proof from Rabbi Yochanan to, by analogy, draw any conclusions about the person who is running around looking for his Aveda on Erev Yontif. Because as Abai says, Yomru kol asrikin asur srikin baitus mutarim, right? Yomru, that everyone else is also in kibbutz except for this person who was looking for his Aveda. They don't know that he was looking for Aveda. That's private knowledge. Rav Ashi Masna, he has a different formulation of Rabbi Zera's Safek about someone who lost an Aveda on Erev Yontiv. Boy Rabbi Zera, Uman sha'avdal Aveda Erev haregel mahu kevan di Uman hu muchacha milsa odilma kevan de la muchasa milsa kihanach lo. In the case of a professional artisan, a skilled workman, take for example, a barber. He's an uman. He's a professional barber. And in that case, Rabbi Zera wants to argue that he should be allowed, if he lost an object on Erev Yontif, to cut his hair on Yontif, on Chol Moed, because of Muchacha Milsa. And I guess the assumption is that a barber is so busy on Erev Yontif that it's Muchacha Milsa. I don't know if this should only apply to a barber or maybe to a physician or somebody who works in Ada. You know, I'm saying there are different jobs of people who are very preoccupied on Erev Yontif, but I guess the barber is specific because everybody wants to take a haircut on Erev Yontif. So everybody knows that the reason why we're allowing this barber to take a haircut on Yontif is because he was too preoccupied on Erev Yontif. He's an onus. Oh, Dilma, should we say no? This is not like a person who gets out of jail or, comes off the boat from China, where everybody and their uncle realized that he couldn't possibly have cut his hair. It's absolutely public knowledge. But in the case of a barber, it's not absolutely public knowledge. He could have found the time to take a haircut. So the Gemara ends up with an unresolved question of Rabbi Zera. And again, according to the two Lishonos, let's just review them. According to the first Lishon of Rabbi Zera, we're talking about a person who on Erev Yontif had lost an Aveda. Nobody knows about it. Or according to the second Lishon of Rabbi Zera, we're talking about a barber who is very, very preoccupied, very busy on Erev Yontif, and everybody knows about that. In the case of someone who lost an Aveda, in the first Lishon of Rabbi Zera, who knows that it's not public knowledge that he lost an Aveda? In the case of an Uman who's very busy on Erev Yontif, like a barber, everybody knows that he didn't have a chance to cut his hair, and therefore Rabbi Zera thinks it might be reason to be lenient and allow him to cut his hair on Chol Hamoed. The Mishnah says, Medina Sayam. Oh, now we get into a whole sugi. A person gets off the boat on Chol Hamoed from an overseas travel, and we're going to allow him, says the Mishnah, to take a haircut or launder his clothes on Chol Hamoed. Maslisin to lok Rabbi Yud. Tisanya Rabbi Yud Omer Abba Miyudin Sayam Lo Yigalea Mipnei Sheyotza Shelo B'Rshus. So what does this phrase Yotza Shelo B'Rshus mean? The flip side of Yotza Shelo B'Rshus is Yotza B'Rshus. Rshus is a word, it has many meanings, but in our context, Rshus means the government. It means those who have authority. Now, if it's Yotza B'Rshus, it means he went out on this trip, sailing the seven seas, because of a compelling decision of the ruling authorities. Shelo B'Rshus means he decided that he's taking a trip, a long boat ride. Like my father's first shiloh when he was in Rabbanas in Bangor, Maine. That was his first shtel. He was 22 years old. So he told me that his first shiloh that he had was a man and a woman were married for many, many years. They skimmed and saved pennies until at the end of this period of about 60 years, they were able to buy tickets, 2 tickets, to sail all over the world. The only problem is that her husband died 2 days before the ship embarked. And she asked my father, would she be allowed to sit Shiva on the ship? That was the shiloh that he had, his first shiloh in Rabbanan. So people take, they take a trip around the world. Remember that movie, what was called Around the World in 80 Days? So Amar Rava. So Rava wants to set up 3 different categories of people who embark on a cruise. One is Lashut, somebody wants to see the world. Divrei Hakol Os. We're not going to allow him because he decided before Yontif that he's going to get on a boat and sail the 7 seas for his own pleasure. That we're going to allow him to take a haircut when he comes back home on Chol Hamoed. So everybody agrees that that's us. Limzonos, if on the other hand, he needs to bring food, to supply food for his table, for his family, Divrei Hakol Mutar. If he had to take a trip in order to eke out a living, and he had no choice in the matter, he's honest, everybody agrees. Then in such a case, he's allowed to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree. So where then is the machlokas, says Rava, which is recorded in our Mishnah? Lo nechleku el arvicha. What about a person who has money in the bank? He wants to embark on a trip to, buy and sell, import and export, and make a lot of money. Mimedamile kilashut. Mar medamile kilashut. Umar medamile kimizonos. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this guy is on a luxury trip. It's like taking a trip cruise around the world. Why should we allow him and consider him an anus to take a haircut on Chol Hamoed just because he decided he wants to import whatever and make a lot of money? Whereas the Chachamim say, no, we could be makil, like Mizonos. We're going to we're going to decide whether or not he's going out for a justifiable purpose because he needs to put food on his table, or maybe he wants to make some extra money. At the end of the day, he's not going out for a pleasure trip. He's going out on a business trip. And therefore, we can allow him to cut his hair when he returns on Chol Hamoed. And now the Gemara is going to spend a lot of time quoting a brisa of Rebbe to try to prove that the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is not limited specifically to the case of Harvacha, as Rava would have it, but that the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rebbe applies to all three categories. Omar Rebbe, Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, etc., and Divrei Chachamim, etc. Rebbe is going to come along and he's going to say that from all these three categories and cases of people who embarked on a cruise, on a ship, there are cases where Rebbe says Rabbi Yehuda's logic is correct. And we have to be machmir because shalom b'rshus, he wasn't forced by the authorities. And there are other cases where the Chachamim make more sense, and their opinion is more appealing, when he was sent out by compelling reasons by the authorities on this trip. But in any event, you see from the language of Rebbe in the Brisa that the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim is much broader than Rava would allow. And out of these various categories and cases, Rebbe is going to agree in certain cases like Rabbi Yehuda and it's asur, and certain cases like Chacham it's mutter. The Gemara says the following. Let's analyze the statement of Rebbe. Rebbe says, Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Kshyatza Shalom B'Rshus, My Shalom B'Rshus. And again, the language of Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda implies that the Chacham disagree with him. So Ilay Melashut, if it's a case where he went out for pleasure as a vacation, then according to you, Rava, so how can you say Nirim Dvarav? Nirim Dvarav means we accept his opinion as opposed to Chachamim. You're telling me, Rava, that they never argued about a case of Lashut. El Mizonos, right? The Gemara is using the law of the excluded middle. Let's go eliminate all possibilities. If it's Mizonos, called Mutter. If he has to eke out a livelihood, then you, Rava, said there was no machloka. So what does it mean when Rebbe says Nirim Divrei Chachamim? What do you mean Nirim Divrei Chachamim? Rebbe Yehuda never disagreed. Ela Pshita Larvacha. So now you, Rava, have no choice. You have no other option but to assume that when Rebbe says that Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Kishayatza Shalom B'Rshus, there was nothing compelling you to go. That's a case of harvacha. He went to make an extra buck. He's a wealthy guy, and Rebbe is siding with Rabbi Yehuda l'chumra in this case of harvacha. And we're not going to allow him to cut his hair on Chol Moed. If that be the case, then Ema Seifa. How are you going to explain Nirim Divrei Chachamim Hitchayatza B'Rshus? Again, my B'Rshus, Ilay Mizonos is Hamar Divrei Kol Mutter. So it can't be that we're, Rebbe is tipping the scale in favor of the kul of the Chachamim in the case of Mizonos, because even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that in the case of Mizonos, according to Rava's logic, it's mutter to take a haircut. So why are you saying Nirim Divrei Chachamim? El Arvacha. So you're saying, Rava, that the only machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim is about Arvacha. But you just finished telling me in the Reisha that Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Kishayatza Shalom B'Rshus, that harvacha is considered Shalom B'Rshus, meaning you made your own decision. You were not sent there by the Rishus, by mitigating circumstances against your will. So now you're getting to the Sefer, and again you talk about the same exact situation of harvacha, and Rebbe is now saying Divrei Chachamim. We just finished saying that Nirim Divrei Rebbe. I'm sorry, Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda in the case of harvacha. So the Gemara defends Rava by saying Hachi Kamar. Nirim Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Lirabanan. The Rabbanan accepted Rabbi Yehuda Kishiyatza Shalom Rishus, and minded that's Lashut. And therefore, says Rava, in the case of Lashut, where he's just roaming around the earth, everybody agrees unanimously, even the Chachamim, that we're not going to allow you when you return to take a haircut. As Rava said before, the Chachamim only rejected Rabbi Yehuda in the case of Arvacha. They consider it like Mizonos. Aval Lashut, Module, they agree that Lashut is Lo B'Rishus Klal, and therefore it's awesome. Then Rabbi Yehuda himself accepts the logic of the Rabbanon, Kishiyatzim Rishus Ma'ininu Limizonos, Shafil Rabbi Yehuda Lo Nechlach Alem El Arvacha Limzonos Modu, because we have to allow him to cut his hair on his return. He had every single compelling, right to go out on this trip to make a living. He got a living. So the Gemara now is able to reconcile this brisa with Rava by reinterpreting the Nirim, that the Nirim, Divrei, etc., is not the way Rebbe saw it, making a decision and preferring Rabbi Yehuda over the Chachamim, but Nirim, Divrei is a statement that's made by the Bar Plukta, and it's cutting down the area of the Machlokus. The Machlokus is only in the case of Harvacha. Omer Shmuel, Katan anolad b'moed, mutar legaleach b'moed. Okay, so now we have a case of a baby who's got a lot of hair. He says, long hair that distresses the baby. So we're not talking about medically mandated hair, because then for sure it would be mutar. But in order to relieve the distress. So Shmuel says, this baby was imprisoned in its mother's womb. Now it got out of its mother's womb and it's Chol Moed. We can certainly cut its hair. So Gemara's Medaik, Moed in Meikar Allah. What if the child was born on Erev Yontif? Then we expect that they would have cut the hair of the child, of the infant, the newborn baby, on Erev Yontif. So we're not going to allow cutting it on Yontif. And that implication contradicts a brisa, which is now quoted by Rav Pinchas. We have a brisa that seems to indicate that under all circumstances, we will cut the hair of the infant. And this brisa is going to present an equation between two sets of halachas. The halacha of Isur Giluach on Chol Moed with the halacha of the Isur Giluach of an Ovel, which means that if a person ever lost one of his 7 close relatives, then for a period of 30 days, he's not allowed to cut his hair. And the Brisa says, "Kol elu shomu mutar legaleach b'moed." In all those exceptional cases where we allow cutting the hair on the moed, mutar legaleach b'mei avil. We're going to have a parallel leniency allowing an avel during his 30-day period of avelus to cut his hair. So now the Gemara is medayik in the Brisa. In those cases where you're not allowed to be megalech b'moed, the Brisa is implying that asul galech b'mei evon, that during avelus you're not allowed to cut your hair. So the Gemara is now assuming an absolute equation. If it's asur in giluach in moed, it's asur in giluach in avelus. If it's mutar in giluach in moed, then it's mutar giluach in avelus.